has been overshadowed by the racism of online trolls. The Prime Minister has just, in Prime Minister's Questions, reinforced our collective condemnation of racism online and offline. Individuals who commit racist offences should face the full force of the law, and we already have robust legislation in place to deal with online hate. But governments around the world are grappling with how we collectively tame the wild west of the internet. We are leading the world in tackling online harms in the introduction of the Online Safety Bill. It will put in place measures to tackle illegal and legal but harmful abuse, including racist abuse. If major platforms do not meet their own standards to keep people safe and address abuse quickly and effectively, they could face enforcement action. Let one message ring loud and clear to those companies. There is no reason for companies to wait until the regime is fully running to take action against this abhorrent abuse. Indeed, such delays, I suspect, Mr. Speaker, will serve to stiffen the resolve of the government and indeed of this House. In addition to this, we have asked the Law Commission to conduct a wide-ranging review into hate crime, including offensive online communications. Let's put this in context. In 2019 to 2020, the police recorded more than 76,000 race-hate crimes. Increases in police-recorded hate crime in recent years have been driven by improvements in crime recording and better identification of what constitutes a hate crime. While statistics can help us track trends, we must, of course, always remember that behind the numbers are real people who are often left traumatised and shaken by their experiences. There is nothing so damaging, so corrosive about the impact that racism has both on victims and on our communities more widely. And so I'd like to conclude this statement with the words of our England captain, Gareth Southgate. We have been a beacon of light in bringing people together. The national team stands for everybody, and so that togetherness has to continue. We have shown the power our country has when it does come together. Mr. Speaker, let us all live up to those words.
No, Nick Thomas.
I'm grateful for that response, but the reaction of this government has lacked urgency and completely failed to understand the scale of the revulsion that exists as a result of the events of recent days. The England men's football players have been a credit to the country on and off the pitch. And when they took the knee to stand against racism, this was not gesture politics. They spoke courageously to a desire for change across our country. And the failure of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary to condemn those who were booing the team taking the knee was shameful, and it frankly makes their later protestations of support for the team no more than empty words. And the Home Secretary hasn't even bothered to turn up to answer this question today. The racist abuse to which Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka have been subjected is disgraceful. And such behaviour has been too common on social media for too long. Social media platforms have had more than long enough to act. The Home Secretary said to me on Monday that legislation will be absolutely pivotal, but the government has dragged its feet on bringing the Online Harms Bill forward. Worse still, the bill as currently proposed will not address what we've seen in the last couple of days. Allowing social media companies to set their own terms and conditions will not be enough. Will the government therefore commit to including criminal sanctions for senior executives in that bill? And in addition, will the Minister tell us exactly when the government will be acceding to the demand on these benches to extend football banning orders to offences that take place online, as was promised by the Prime Minister in Prime Minister's Questions? And finally, will the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary finally show some leadership and apologise for siding with those who are booing and not with the brave England players?
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'll just explain to the House where the Home Secretary is today. She is, at this very moment, hosting a long-standing meeting with charities who are on the front line of tackling victims, tackling violence against women and girls and survivors of those crimes. And so I hope the House will instead put up with me in order to answer this urgent question. But I know that the Home Secretary would reject many of the, indeed all of the allegations that the Honourable Gentleman has just made about her conduct. She has been relentless. She has been relentless in pursuing social media companies to ensure that they take much tougher stances, as we all expect, not just in relation to racism online, but also child sexual exploitation and terrorism and other offences. And so I do not accept his accusations across the dispatch box. In terms of the online safety bill, this is a landmark piece of legislation. The government has been very, very careful to ensure that this bill, A, receives the scrutiny of the House. That is why we are taking the confident step, I would say, of opening the draft bill up to pre-legislative scrutiny. We don't do that for every bill, but we want to get this bill right. The House will remember we did exactly the same with the domestic abuse bill, and the bill was made all the better for it. And so I'm delighted that Labour have provided now, I understand, the names for their committee members so that the pre-legislative scrutiny can take place at pace. But I underline the message that this House, but also the public, are watching the behaviours of online companies very carefully. Any company would be very wise to set out what it plans to do in relation to meeting the expectations of this place and the public when it comes to conducting their systems in a way that is clear and that prevents the sorts of abuse we have seen this weekend. In terms of football banning orders, again, the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, forgive me, would have heard the Prime Minister say very clearly at PMQs about the work that the government is conducting in relation to football banning orders. It is complex because we know, for example, some of the trolls that have targeted some members of the team over the weekend are overseas. But we want very much to work with football clubs and others to ensure that these orders have the powers that we all want them to have. And as I have said throughout, and this is the golden thread that runs throughout our work on tackling online crimes, what is illegal offline is illegal online, and that is the principle we will be adopting throughout the online safety bill.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for a statement and for calling out some of the vile racist abuse that our brilliant players have had to face. On Sunday night, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate identified and reported 105 Instagram accounts which racially abused members of the England football team. As of this morning, only 6 of them have been taken down. So whilst we're getting warm words from some of these social media companies, that appears to be all we're getting from them at present. Can my honourable friend therefore confirm that the online safety bill will be brought forward with speed and that those who post this abuse online will be held to proper account?
I'm extremely grateful. Indeed, my honourable friend highlights some of the very practical responses that social media companies can take right now. They don't need to wait for the online safety bill. I read with some dismay and anger a report in the I paper today about how Instagram had applied its own rules, community rules, in relation to offensive emojis that were sent to players and indeed highly offensive words. Now, the social media companies themselves have to explain how exactly their community rules accord with the expectations and indeed the law of our country. But may I just make this point again? We are not alone in this. This is a challenge facing every democratic society in the world, and it is by working together, as we are doing with our voluntary principles on tackling terrorism and child sexual exploitation, that is how we're going to be able to make real progress against these companies and against this hatred.
We now go to SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald. Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The disgusting online racism faced by England players is unfortunately overshadowing a fantastic tournament and a fantastic performance by an England team that has rightly attracted admiration and perhaps even a little bit of envy. So yes, we urgently need stronger online regulation. Content must be taken down faster, and platforms can no longer be allowed to support racist content through shamefully lax rules. And we need a debate on how we identify and punish those peddling this hate. But will she agree that social media regulation is not a silver bullet? Online racism reflects offline racism, and the government needs to take tackling racism, including structural and institutional racism, more seriously. Mr. Speaker, whatever our disagreements, no one could say that the previous Prime Minister didn't take tackling racism incredibly seriously. Why do we struggle to say the same about the current Prime Minister? Isn't it because on his watch, too many in his party have spent more time downplaying racism than tackling it, and more time ridiculing anti-racism campaigners than going after those who actually peddle racism? So yes, we'll support action to clamp down on online platforms, but will she support a change in attitude in her party?
Again, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and I can assure him that had Scotland reached the same dizzy heights as England, I'd have been cheering them on with great passion and strength of feeling. So I'm pleased that he is able to concede some support for the England team. In terms of his wider question about racism and hate speech across society, he is right to acknowledge that this is a matter for us all to tackle, and he will know, as sitting on the Home Affairs Select Committee as he does, the work that the government is doing to tackle hate speech and hate crimes. Of course, hate crimes is a very wide term. It includes not simply racism, but also hatred towards disabled people, towards transgender people and so on. And so that's why we have asked the Law Commission to look at online crimes to make sure that they're up to date and meet our expectations. But the wider message, I think, on racism more generally is actually I have been overwhelmed by the public's response to these trolls over the weekend. If we look at what happened to the mural in Withington, for example, and how the public responded, how angry they were that some individual had defaced the mural in Withington, and how positive the public's reaction to that has been. I think that is what we need to very much reflect on and act on. And indeed, that's why I quoted our captain, because I think he has summed up where the public and where we are on this. And it is by working together that we're going to tackle some of these hateful attitudes.
Well, good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Home Secretary herself has been at the receiving end of terrible racist abuse. So will the Minister agree with me that fighting racism online and in any other form is a priority for her and for the government? And does she also agree that this fight is mostly effective when racism and anti-racism campaigns are fully understood by everyone, and that what really matters is when meaningful action is taken to tackle the scourge that racism is?
Very much so. And the Home Secretary, like other members across this House, and we know, sadly, that women in particular, women of colour, are targeted, it seems, by online trolls. There are many people in our society who have to deal with this racism, both online but also, sadly, offline. And so I think part of our national conversation should be how we can each of us show our complete support for the campaigns to combat racism and to ensure that we are doing everything we can, both individually but as a country, to tackle racist behaviour. I know the Home Secretary feels very strongly about this, and indeed she has been particularly strong in her communications with tech companies across the 2 years she has been in office. But I know that that is a feeling shared by many in this House, and as I say, I'm very conscious that there are others in this place who are victims as well.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper. Yvette?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the Instagram profiles of England heroes this lunchtime are still racist posts, including blatantly racist words and emojis that have been up for more than 24 hours. I have challenged Instagram on this from the Home Affairs Committee repeatedly over the last few days. They have told me this morning that using some of those emojis as racist slurs is against their rules, yet inexplicably, they are still up and it is still taking them days to remove these posts. Speed matters. Can the Minister tell me what the online safety bill is actually going to do to take action on this speed issue and to penalise companies for not moving fast enough? Because at the moment, it looks as though that action won't happen. That's unacceptable. Keyboard cowards are being given a megaphone by these social media companies, and it has to stop.
Well, I completely agree with the Right Honourable Lady and Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. It is, I don't think these tech companies quite understand the anger and frustration of everyone involved in trying to scrutinise and to hold these companies to account when they come back at us with it doesn't meet our community rules. Words such as the words I suspect she is thinking about, the emojis, the language, this is unacceptable in any civilised society, and that includes online fora as well as offline. And so this bill is a real opportunity for the government, A, to lay the law down, but also, as I say, for parliamentarians across the House to make their views known. I have long urged the companies to listen carefully to members of Parliament in this place, and I would urge them again to do so, because if they don't listen, we will act.
We now come to Felicity Button.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who represents one of the most diverse constituencies in the entire country, can I put on the record how abhorrent racism is of any form? Does my honourable friend agree with me that many of these online trolls hide behind the cloak of anonymity? Can she confirm that the police can still prosecute anonymous postings? And will she consider whether we should outlaw online posting? Because I do think people would take more personal responsibility if it were in their own names.
Well, the Honourable Lady alights upon a very important point, but also actually one that will require the scrutiny and the debate of this House, because whilst we know that many cowards hide behind anonymous accounts, there are people who use their anonymity legitimately. So, for example, victims of domestic abuse and indeed whistleblowers in very restrictive regimes overseas. So I know that this place, when we come to scrutinise this bill, will weigh those arguments up very carefully. But again, I do have great sympathy with her viewpoint that if people are able to hide behind these accounts anonymously, then of course it makes it much more difficult for the police to trace them. And so again, we need to think through, I think, as, collectively, where we are prepared to draw the boundaries in the wild west of the internet.
We now come to Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister gave the usual Tory platitudes. Yes, she condemned the horrific racism our England stars have faced, but what will she think about the Prime Minister when he was doing, when he was describing black people as pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, when he used newspaper columns to mock Muslim women as letterboxes and bank robbers, when he refused to condemn the booing of England players taking the knee, and when his Home Secretary derided the anti-racist message as gesture politics? Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, like England star Tyrone Mings has said, that the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister were stoking the fire of racism, giving the green light to racism, and only now, when the consequences are clear, are they feigning outrage?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I had hoped that we were going to be able to conduct this debate in a measured and collective way. I don't genuinely think the Honourable Lady is accusing either the Prime Minister of this country or indeed the Home Secretary of racism. That would be a truly extraordinary allegation to make. But I hope at some point we will be able to work together to tackle racism. That is what we all want to do. That is what the work of this government is directed towards. And I hope that we're able to just lower the tone a little bit and understand that again, she's trying to shout at me again, that in tackling these horrific instances of racism, we need to work collectively together, and shouting at me across the dispatch box is not going to help with that.
Let's go to Damien Collins. Damien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the incidence of racism on social media over the last few days shows why the approach taken in the draft online safety bill is right, that we need an independent regulator that will hold the companies to account? They've failed to take down this abuse even though it's against their platform policies. They've failed to take it down when people have complained about it. And worse than that, their own recommendation tools were actually promoting the content on Sunday night. This has to stop, and it'll only stop when there's independent regulation of these companies.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. He is absolutely right in his description of this bill as being necessary and required. As I said, I think in 10, 15 years' time, we will look back on this era of the internet, and we will, with the regulations in place, we will be in a much better place in terms of people being able to access social media and so on in a positive, healthy way, rather than having to put up with this hatred that we have seen in some quarters. But I also would emphasise that with the bill, we have, as part of imposing this duty of care, we are proposing fines on the companies concerned of up to £18 million, or, importantly, up to 10% of qualifying annual turnover. I suspect that second figure may be the figure that helps to concentrate minds.
Let's go to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the issue that the government has refused to take any action towards ending social media discrimination of any kind? This, in turn, has fanned the flames of divisiveness and hate in our communities that we're currently witnessing, as my friend, the member for Coventry South, has just pointed out. The Amnesty International report on toxic Twitter pointed out that Black women are 84% more likely to experience racist abuse online than anyone else. So the question to the Minister is quite simply this: what real steps is she going to take urgently to ensure that no one, and I mean absolutely no one, is able to post any racist abuse online at all?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect I'm not the only person who has felt a little bit astonished that it is this right honourable member who's chosen to ask that question about taking immediate action to tackle racism. I remind the House of the findings of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission under his watch. Labour has unlawfully discriminated against, harassed or